Good morning, you all. Today we're going to deal with chapter 6 of Live Not by Lies. This is on Cultivate Cultural Memory. And it was a powerful chapter. It had a lot to say. And remember that these chapters that we're dealing with are going to be looking at what we can do at this present time. Today, we are dealing with the chapter 6, Cultivate Cultural Memory. Here are the highlight sections: why memory matters, create small fortresses of memory, make the parallel polis or cities into sanctuary cities, bear communal witness to future generations, and then the follow-up: see, judge, and act. Notice on the right the quote that is from the book 1984. This is the party slogan. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And who is controlling the present right now? That is our important understanding to realize what's happening so that we can affect this culture and bring about a godly turnaround. I want to give you an example of resistance. And this refers to a Czech composer, O.F. Korte, Oldřich František Korte. He was born in 1926 in Sala, Slovakia. My ancestors were born in Trkova, Slovakia. And he died in 2014 in Prague in the Czech Republic. He was a Czech composer, a pianist, publicist, and a writer. He studied at the Prague Conservatory from 1943 to 1949, but it was interrupted by an imprisonment in the concentration camp for some of the things that he said or some of the music that he was dealing with that was against the regime. So he spent a little over a year in a concentration camp for that. And then he was forced, after he got his degree, he was forced to work outside of the artistic professions, his love, his passion, but he continued his musical and literary activities on the side. And that's what a lot of people in these communist controlled countries had to do. They were forced to work outside of their passion. They did not have the freedom to do what they wanted to do full time. But he did a lot. He toured with the Czech Experimental Theater, Laterna Magica, and played piano for more than 3,000 performances. Now, these experimental theaters were basically underground theaters. He wrote a number of musical works, including a well-respected piano sonata, which I received yesterday in the mail through a CD, and it's a beautiful sonata. Now, why did I bring up O.F. Korte? Well, I met Mr. Korte in Japan while I was a missionary there, when we were both climbing the steps to one of the highest Shinto shrines in Japan, Kompira-san. We had a great discussion on these steps looking out over the city, and I found him to be extremely gracious and very easy to talk to. His English was excellent. It seemed that we had kindred spirits. He gave me his card, and we kept up correspondence. And he invited me to stay with him if I ever made it to Czechoslovakia once I left Japan. So at that time of leaving Japan, I made plans to visit him, wrote to him. It was okay. But unfortunately, my visa would not come through in time. This was a time when Czechoslovakia was still under communist control, 1979, 1980 when I left. So I did not get to go. But one thing that I remembered discussing on the steps was how he had been put in prison for his work with the underground theater. He struck me as someone who would always fight for the truth. And that's why I wanted to get to know him better. And now I can at least listen to his music and recall those bits of conversation that we had. But he was part of the resistance. He stood up for truth, and he suffered for it, but he was also victorious over it in his own way. And that's what we need to do. We need to look ahead, we need to cling to God, and we need to hold on to our families and build them up. And that's what this chapter is all about. So, cultivate cultural memory. What does our culture believe now? What happens when we forget the atrocities of communism? Because that's happening more and more. What happens when we forget our own past? Will the act of forgetting make us more vulnerable to totalitarianism in general? Well, I think those questions are very valid. And in order to look at some ways that our culture is turning, I followed one of the surveys that Rod Dreher mentioned in his book, and it's put out by um, the Victims of Communism Foundation. It's put out by the Victims of Communism Foundation. So this is their annual report on U.S. attitudes towards socialism, communism, and collectivism. And this is the 2020 report. They've done it for the last 3 years. So on the right side, you see the generations defined. So keep this in mind as we look through these charts. Generation Z would be those that are basically high school and college age right now, 14% of the population. The millennials, ages 24 to 39, would be 26% of our population. Gen X, ages 40 to 55, 23% of our population. The boomers, which many of us are part of, ages 56 to 74, 31% of the population. And the silent generation, 75 or older, 6%. So keep those divisions in mind as we go through these charts. Very, very helpful charts. But here there are some highlights that they have on views on ideologies, and I want to go through these. First one, the term capitalism is still viewed most favorably, but has waned slightly in the past few years. You'll be surprised to see how it compares with other groups, other movements, other ideologies. Overall, the term capitalism is viewed more favorably. It, however, has trended down to 55%, whereas in 2018 it was 61%. So it's going down. Favorability of the term socialism has rebounded slightly to 40%, up from 36% 2019. Favorability of socialism is up, especially among the Generation Z, 9 points, Generation X, 6 points, and among baby boomers, 5 points up. So that's something to take note of. While most Americans perceive the label capitalist as neutral, it is the only label that is considered a compliment by more than those who consider it an insult. So the next line shows the insult. So people, 37% of the people view socialist as an insult. If you call somebody, oh, he's a socialist. What about Marxist and communists? Well, Marxists, 53% would say that that's an insult, and 67%, if you call somebody a communist, that's an insult. So capitalists are still favorable in some way, but capitalism is not as favorable as we would like it to be, perhaps. In fact, overall, the term capitalism is viewed more favorably, but only 55%. 40% for socialism, 18% for Marxism, and 14% for communism. So even though the majority would not see communism or Marxism or even socialism as favorable, it's creeping up there, and capitalism is losing ground. So you can see that Generation Z and the millennials and Generation X are still lower than what we would see with the boomers and the silent generation, but it's the millennials who are less favorable toward capitalism, and they're right in the midst of it. They're the workers. They're the ones moving up. The favorable opinion of the term socialism is also rising. So you can see, especially with the Generation Z and Generation X, and even the boomers, and even the silent generation. Why? The millennials are maybe taking a turn, perhaps because of the situations that they find themselves in. Look at this for the favorable opinion of the term Marxism. Generation Z, 30% find it favorable. Millennials also around that. Gen X, Boomer, Silent Generation, less so. Marxism is still not as popular as socialism, even though Marxism led to socialism in many ways. What about what they think about Marxism? Well, look at the total on the left. A third of the people really aren't sure what it means. They probably haven't studied it critically. 7% of the total say that it's a social movement to effect positive change against injustice. I think this percentage group is going to move up more and more, and probably this year with the Biden administration and all the cultural changes, this perception of socialism will become more the norm. Then 16% say governments, socialism would represent governments which manage the aspect of productivity of society for the good of all. So these two combined would be kind of on the minds of the rising socialists, I think, today. But there's still quite a few that see socialism as a totalitarian state that suppresses the freedom of its citizens. Look over at the silent generation, the oldest generation, and the boomers. Still over 50% sees Marxism as a totalitarian government. But it's shifting, and that's what we have to be concerned about. Defining socialism is very interesting. Notice on the left, the box says 68% of Americans do not define socialism as the government owning all property and controlling nearly 100% of the national economy. 32% do. But look at what 31% think of when they think of socialism. They think it means a free market economy with private property, but one where the government provides ample social welfare benefits, as in many Scandinavian and Western European countries. So free gifts provided. 15% see socialism as something that means a free market economy with private property, where the government intervenes when necessary to create an even playing field for all citizens and businesses. And I think that the new wave of socialists would fit into these two categories. 10% see it as just a vague new name for more or less what the Democratic Party in the U.S. supports today. 6% see it as referring to a new system that has not yet been created, something that is going to be new. And it's not going to have the insanity marker that all the other Marxist socialist governments have had in the past. So that's something to keep a watch over. Over a quarter, or 26% of Americans, say they support the gradual elimination of the capitalist system in favor of a more socialist system. So you see that. 41% of the total oppose it, but that's still a quarter that support this. And notice that the millennials are the ones that support it the most. And that's where we have a lot of the people moving up in the society. This is interesting. Who is trusted to take care of our interests while the total is still averaging about 87% saying that in self we trust. More and more are trusting really in government as the way to support them, fend for their needs, give them what they want. More and more want that. They don't want to fend for themselves totally. And so I think that this will be moving in a different direction as the cancel culture continues its movement. What do you think America is? Well, 44% of Gen Z think America is one of the most unequal societies in the world. That's interesting. So you see the total column on the left. Among the most unequal societies of the world, 37% say that. Gen Z, even more. Millennials, Gen X is on that same mark. But that's alarming, I think. to see that so many people see America as an unequal society. And I think that that is because we've been so brought into such a divisive mentality as we look at the racial issues. That's dividing us. And it's giving us, giving the people in America a sense of this inequality. Uh, Equity is the big thing. And equity is one of the most unequal ways to deal with society. And yet that is being pushed in the school system, in the government, everywhere. So we need to understand what's going on. What change would ensure the highest earners pay their fair share? How can we get those billionaires and millionaires to share their money? Well, 63% of Americans say that we need to increase taxes. 49% say that we need a complete change in our economic system. What it would be is still a question mark. And 15%, and most of those would be the boomers and the silent generation, would say, well, increase charitable donations. Have these rich people give more money to these charities and help them out. But what bothers me is this 63% mark for increased taxes. And of course, they want to take the money away from the rich and spread it out to the poor. But taking all the money from the rich, the billionaires and the millionaires, is not going to cut it. It's all going to come back on the middle class. And that's where we'll be asked to pay more and more and more. This is interesting. Should government provide a universal basic income where every citizen receives a monthly stipend from the government? And notice that the yeses are more and more, 34% total for those who think that we should have a basic income. Now, again, where would that come from? More borrowing from China and other countries that we're going to be in hock for the rest of our lives, perhaps. Um, Views on freedom of speech. It's interesting. This doesn't fit what we hear often. Across all generations, nearly 4 in 5 Americans believe that we should tolerate a broad diversity of opinions, including those that are personally offensive. Well, that's not what we hear in the media or the universities or politics. They want one narrative, and that there should only be one narrative, no diversity, no contradictions. And yet, we can see that perhaps more people want diversity, want to have that freedom of speech. So we're being, again, guided by the small minority that is trying to control the whole situation. And then this is an interesting one. This is the last one. Views on the United States. Defender of freedom or racist nation? Well, 44% of the total believes that America is a leading defender of freedom around the world, but that's going down. And what's going up is that the 41% that say America is a racist nation with a long history of discrimination. And look at that in the Gen Z, the ones that are being most affected by the equity education that we get today and the divisive history that's being taught in the schools. 51% believe that America is a racist nation. And you go through the millennials and the Gen X. This is really something that we need to keep watch on, and we need to combat, because it's going to really cause division. And of course, that division is desired by the liberal elites, because that's the way to destroy our culture and bring it around. They have to destroy the Christianity, the religion, the goodness of our nation in order to bring about their goals. So let's look at what we need to do now. Why memory matters. If you look at the little blurb on the right, you have a brain teaser, mind over matter. And I always say, if you don't mind, it doesn't matter. But it really does matter what we mind about our world. So why does memory matter? Well, we need to understand the role of memory in order to resist totalitarianism, as well as transmit our faith to the next generation. That's key. And there are 3 kinds of memory: historical, social, cultural. course, historical is the objective recollection of the past based on facts. We need to know what the facts are. History is hard sometimes to put together those facts, but we need to fight for that. We need to look at evidence. There's a social memory, what facts people choose to remember about the past. And that's changing before our very eyes. It is amazing how fast things are changing. And then the cultural memory, which is what we want to focus on. This is what society chooses to remember to build its collective identity. It's who we are as a nation. And that's changing because we're forgetting, we're being forced to forget a lot of these cultural memories. This would involve a nation's gods, God Himself, the true God, heroes, villains, who they are, what they did, why they were bad, landmarks, art, music, holidays, a lot of things that fit into our cultural memory. It's being changed. It's being really torn to shreds in many parts of our society, and we need to be on guard against that. We need to hold fast to the cultural memories. Dreher says this on page 114: the more totalitarian a regime's nature, the more it will try to force people to forget their cultural memories. And you see the banner down at the bottom. This is what he says in the page before. Everything about modern society is designed to make memory, historical, social, and cultural, hard to cultivate. And that's because they have a purpose, they have an agenda. You have to get rid of cultural memory to start a new regime. Totalitarian systems want the total possession and control of human memory. And that's what we see happening in this elitist society that's moving forward. Remember, people only remember what they are taught to remember. This is why a total monopoly on information is so important for the side that wants to control a society's memory. And of course, if you have the media, you can generate that that false information that will lead to this. And that's why we need to have a media that is outside of these biases. And that's hard to do, especially today. This is also why universities in America were able to subvert the cultural memory of so many students. And this is where a lot of this has happened for the last 5-6 decades. The universities have been the hot plate of so many of these ideas. By teaching them what they thought was important to remember, they also taught them what they need to consider unimportant, not worthy of remembering or practicing. And that has taken place in many ways. On the right, you have a picture of a Memorial Hall, Harvard University. And this is one of the key universities that has led in this revolution of sorts. Down in the banner at the bottom, I have this little point. An earlier seal for Harvard University once said, "For Christ and church." It was a place for educating pastors and church leaders. Now it only says veritas, or truth. However, whose truth is it? It's the truth of the commanding culture and what we would call the cancel culture today. Only their truth is true truth for them. Dreher says this: communism had a particular ideological vision that required it to destroy traditions, including traditional Christianity. Nothing outside the communist order could be allowed to exist. Isn't that what we're seeing come about now, or what they're trying to do? They're trying to cancel what is adverse to their projection, their revolutionary views, and the church stands mightily in its way. That's why we need to hold fast to the church and our families in the church. In other words, there could only be one view of the society. All other views that counter the party lines would have to be canceled. And therefore, we have the cancel culture. So how do we fight against this? Well, we need to live in faith. We need to demonstrate that truth is not only what we say, but more so in what we do. And that's what people need to see. They need to see our actions. Our children need to see us acting in faith and strongly in faith. And that's what we need to look toward. Communism used its massive power to manipulate truth and destroy memory. In its place, the ones in power created history to serve their own needs. Isn't that what's happening today? We're getting a new history. And I surely see that as I'm helping to design a history course for for public school where I work in the Department of Education. And it really is unnerving to see what the teachers are putting together and what the standards have been for these things. It's tearing apart our culture. It's causing us to have a different sense of memory and taking away the memory that we have had for all these centuries. So we must hold fast to the truth of the gospel and pass it down to the next generation. So that's our goal. Well, how do you destroy cultural memory? Well, these are ways that people are going about doing that today. You destroy the monuments of past heroes. And over on the right, I have a statue of Christopher Columbus. He comes in fourth as far as which statues to take down. First, you'd have Lenin and Stalin and General Lee, and then Christopher Columbus. Next, you malign the achievements of former leaders, and that's being done in many ways. You fill the universities with socialist, anti-American teachers, and that's been done for decades, as I have said. You commandeer the media and create false narratives, and this becomes a propaganda machine. We have seen this very much in the last 4 years, really. You create false history, and that's being done at an alarming rate. You fill political offices with liberal radicals. You create divisions between the races, and this is so that the regime would be able to divide our country, divide and conquer. Isn't that what many war theories have said? You divide and you conquer. United we stand, divided we fall, and we are falling. You persecute Christians and call evil good. You see the banner below from Isaiah 5:20. It says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter." And that's what's happening, where evil is called good. You find ways to limit free speech, and that is very prevalent, and you make the government your God. It becomes a religion. It has its own worship system. It has its own leaders and priests, but they're not in the line of God's kingdom at all. So the second thing that we need to do, and these next ones are much shorter, we need to create small fortresses of memory. One of the strongest points of resistance is the family and the cultural memories it passes on. Another strong area that brings strength, purpose, and godliness is religion, and that's where we come in. In communist Poland, Dreher says, the only long-lasting social institutions that existed were the church and the family, and they were strengthened in various ways because the communist regime knew that if you destroy the church and the family, you destroy the nation. And that's what this new cancel culture regime wants to do, destroy the church and the family. And we need to resist that. How do we know not only what to remember, but also how to remember it? Well, that's what we're going to be doing in the next few chapters as well. Dreher says we need to, quote, create distinct small communities, especially families and religious fellowships in which it is possible both to speak truthfully and to embody truth. And so as you see on the right side, the picture of the Colosseum, the Christians past huddling in prayer before the lions come out. We have the verse, 2 Corinthians 12:10. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. When I am weak, then I am strong. Why are we strong? Because God works through us, and many people will come to the Lord. So we need to remember that, even in persecution. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. And it's been that way through many, many centuries. Next section is on making the parallel polis or city into sanctuary cities. So the idea behind this act, making parallel polis in totalitarian countries, is that alternative social structures would be set up that would allow truth about history, faith, and knowledge to be preserved and passed on to the next generation. We need to be setting up these alternative structures. And in many ways, we have them in place. We need to increase those structures. One key institution that was used in that past regime was to conduct seminars in private homes. Often visiting intellectuals would come and speak on forbidden topics that would help preserve the cultural history. And of course, if they were found out, they would be taken off to jail, and many of them were persecuted and jailed for these private educational and spiritual times. Ways that we can enact parallel polis in our time would be to create community groups that would present historical truth as well as spiritual guidance. And that's why we need to be vigilant in supporting homeschooling and private Christian education. We need to hold on to that because that's where the truth is taught. Remember what Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, even when he is old, he will not depart from it. And then finally, bear communal witness to future generations. And here you have some pictures of the Butova Memorial that's mentioned in the book, where this is south of Moscow, and this was one of the killing fields where political prisoners were taken out and executed and buried. And now it's a memorial to those people, and you see a row of the names etched in granite. And people will gather on a certain day each year, and they will read through these particular names to honor them, to memorialize their fight for freedom. Father Kirill is the one who really put all this together, fought for it, and now and headed that up. And he said, people today have a responsibility to search out more information than what they are offered on TV, and to know how to look critically on what they're reading and seeing. We need to do that. We need to follow his words. If we want to stay free, then we will need to make sure that our cultural history is passed on to the next generation. That's your job. We also need to remember what is true so that we will not be lured into the lie. Live not by lies. Be bold in the truth. And then finally, see, judge, and act. As Dreher says, memory, historical and otherwise, is a weapon of cultural self-defense. History is culture, and so is Christianity. We need to defend Christianity. We need to learn how to defend it better. And he says this, to be indifferent or even hostile to tradition is to surrender to those in power who want to legitimate a new social and political order. To perceive the critical importance of memory and the role culture plays in preserving and transmitting it is crucially important for Christianity's survival. So we need to fight this cancel culture by strengthening our own culture, that of the Christian culture. So what can we do? In society at large, we need to keep homeschooling alive and well. Christian schools growing and active. Christian worship and celebrations vibrant and holy. Group prayer powerful and guided by truth and sincere hearts. And charity sacrificial and loving. Can you do these things? Will you be part of this? We need it so much at this time. In our families, we need to train up our children in the Word of God, pray together, and let them see us doing God's work cheerfully and faithfully. And as you see in this little candle to the right, faith will keep the light on. We need even a candle to light the darkness, and we can go forward with that. And that's what we need to do. Are you willing to do that? Are you willing to sacrifice to be a part of the resistance movement? We need you for this.